Morning and welcome to the Center for American Progress Action Fund. We're going to get started in just a second, but before we do, we ask that you please silence all your cell phones and take your seats. At the end of the program, there will be a brief Q&A session. We ask that you state your name and affiliation before asking your brief question. Thanks.
Good morning. My name is Neera, Tanden, and I'm president of the Center for American Progress Action Fund. I'm so glad that all of you could be here with us today. Today, we are thrilled to welcome a very special guest, the 49th Governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer. Governor Whitmer is a lifelong resident of Michigan who was born into a family of public servants who has spent nearly her entire career fighting on behalf of people in her home state. As the first woman to ever serve as a leader of the Michigan State Senate, she worked to expand affordable health care, getting a Medicaid expansion in a Republican state, a state with a Republican governor. She's also safeguarded funding for public education and worked to strengthen the rights of workers and organized labor. During her 2018 campaign for governor, she visited every single one of Michigan's 83 counties to hear about the concerns that mattered most in their communities. And she ran on a platform centered around bedrock issues, really kitchen table issues, from cleaning up the state's drinking water to expanding paid family leave and making greater investments in job training and skills. And on election night, she earned the support of voters from across the state, including 9 counties where Donald Trump won in 2016. Since taking office, Governor Whitmer has made it her mission to advance a real progressive and practical agenda, from introducing measures to fight climate change, to creating stronger protections for the LGBTQ workers, and proposing bold action to repair Michigan's roads and other infrastructure. And while she's working to build bridges with the state legislature controlled by members of the opposite party, she's also displayed an unbending determination to stand her ground and fight for what she believes is right. Later in our program, I'll have the chance to sit down with Governor Whitmer to discuss everything that she's accomplished in her first year, along with the priorities for the rest of her administration. But first, I'd like to welcome her to the podium to speak about her vision for the future of the state. So please give a warm welcome to Governor Whitmer.
All right, well, thank you. I'm very pleased to be with all of you today. I am grateful for the work that CAP does, and Neera, I'm so thrilled to spend a little time with you today. I want to thank every one of you in this room for the hard work and dedication that you display in terms of helping people all over our country. I know that the people of Michigan are grateful, as am I personally. The work you do here at the Center for American Progress impacts so many people in my home state. I even have a former CAP employee who is the head of my social media in Michigan, Tori Saylor, who came out of the gun violence prevention policy team here. I know that you all come to work every single day because you want to do what's right for the people of our country, whether it's through advocacy for quality, affordable health care, solid infrastructure, a great public education for our children, or protecting our environment. The work you do here makes a big difference, and we are incredibly grateful in the state of Michigan. I want to start off by telling you a little bit about myself. As Neera said, I'm a lifelong Michigander. I grew up in a household where my mom was a Democrat and my father a Republican. Not just party, members, but actually worked for the 2 leaders of those parties at the time. My mom was one of Frank Kelly, our longtime Attorney General in Michigan, one of his top people, and my dad was the Commerce Director under Governor Bill Milliken. These, of course, was a time when our parties weren't what they look like today, and Republicans and Democrats could find a lot more common ground because we didn't forget what centered us, and that was getting the work of the people done. During my first term in the House of Representatives, and I won in the year 2000, in that first term, I found myself to be a member of the sandwich generation. Unexpectedly, I was taking care of my mother at the end of her life. She was 59 years old and was dying of brain cancer, and I was simultaneously pregnant and gave birth to my first child 2 months before my mom's battle ended. And it was that time in my life that, yes, it was the hardest time, but it was no question in my mind that which made me who I am today. That experience that so many people go through in our country of taking care of a child as well as a parent at the end of their life. That's what propelled me to do so much work in the space of extending and expanding Medicare for people across Michigan. When the governor at the time, Rick Snyder, embraced Medicaid expansion, I knew that he was never going to get it done unless I, as the leader of the Democrats in the Senate, became a partner and really worked to make sure that it happened and we got it over the finish line, and we did. And 680,000 people in my state got health care because of it. The issues that I continue to work to tackle in Michigan are issues that people across our country are confronting every single day. Every one of us wants to be able to wake up and take our children to school, to a great public school where they are getting the education they need. We also, by the way, want to know that they're safe while they are at that school. They want to know that if you work hard, you're going to have a real shot at prosperity and integrity in work, no matter what line of work you go into, no matter what community you live in. And people want to know that if they get sick, they're going to be able to have the access to health care, and it's not going to bankrupt them and their families when they need it. These truly are the fundamentals. These are the kitchen table issues that Neera talks about. These are the things that I ran on because this is what the people of Michigan told me that they care about as I got across our state. Right now, there are people in Michigan and across our country who are actively working to block our progress, though. We have a president who's dead set on taking that health care expansion away from people. We have Republicans who every day go to work with the sole mission of repealing the Affordable Care Act. And in Michigan, I'm attempting to work with a Republican legislature that has for decades accepted the status quo on dangerous roads or unclean drinking water or failing schools. So we cannot let up for a second. We've made some great strides, but we have much work to do, and we cannot let up. So while I've hit some roadblocks with the Republicans in my state, we have gerrymandering, unfortunately, and so despite winning more votes for governor than anyone who would ever run for governor in Michigan beforehand, I still have an overwhelmingly Republican legislature to work with. But despite that, we have been able to find some common ground. We found some common ground around criminal justice reform. And I am very excited about some of the bills that have come and some that are in the pipeline. But we have certain challenges that I'm going to have to go right around or right over the legislature on some issues in order to live up to the things that the people of our state want and need to see. I've shown that I am willing to use my executive power and push the envelope and do what we have to do to get things done. A couple of examples in the last month alone. We raised the asset test limits so that low-income families can get the help that they need and to afford necessities like food and their utilities and their clothing and rent. This is a decision that is made by a chief executive, and it was so low that so few people were able to access help when they needed it. They have to go into dire situation just to get a little help from the state. We've changed that single-handedly. And with the help of CAP, we were able to move forward with moving to change our overtime rule in Michigan. This will represent a raise for 200,000 hardworking people who go to work every single day but haven't been able to take care of their families. This is real, meaningful change that will help Michigan families put food on the table and lift more people out of poverty in my state. And I'm going to continue to take these actions and push forward wherever we have to unilaterally when this legislature wants to block the progress. I'm working to make sure that as all eyes turn to Michigan in 2020, that we are prepared, that we ensure that people turn out to vote, their votes get counted, and that we never see an outcome like we saw in the last presidential. Because we need leaders who are going to prioritize the needs of working people. People who make sure that no one works 40 hours a week and still lives in poverty and can't take care of themselves and their families. People who are going to ensure that new parents can access quality, affordable child care when they head back to work. Leaders who will work so that every child, no matter what community, no matter what zip code they live in, gets a great education and can read by 3rd grade. And people who are going to ensure that people like my mom, who lost her battle with brain cancer when I was in my 20s, can pay their medical bills without going into bankruptcy. As governor, my number one goal is to ensure that everyone in my state has these opportunities. And I know that CAP shares these values, and every member of CAP does as well. So I want to thank you for having me today. I want to thank you for the work that you do, and I want to pre-thank you for continuing this partnership so that after this next calendar year, we're able to celebrate some victories and keep moving forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm really grateful to your leadership, and we're always excited to work with you and your staff. I wanted to thank you again for your fight and determination on so many issues. You talked about a few of your accomplishments in your remarks. I also wanted to ask you about what are the areas that you're focused on as you approach your next year, and are there particular successes that you're most proud of? I also just want to say a thank you. I worked in the Obama administration on the Affordable Care Act, and there were not that many states that had Republican governors that were pushing forward on the Medicaid expansion, and it is a singular success in Michigan that happened, and I appreciate your point about Governor Snyder, but he would not have made that decision that he did make if he didn't have leadership like yours to ensure that he could get it through. So I also just want to say thank you on that particular issue that's close to my heart. But basically, what are the big items on your agenda going forward?
So, I'm 11 months in now, and in some ways it feels like I just took my oath of office yesterday, and in other ways it feels like it was a decade ago, I'll be honest with you. It's, we have done a lot in the first 11 months, and I feel really good about the team that I have around me and the appointments that I've made. It's really important to me as an organization that we're living our values. And we do that every day in terms of ensuring that we level barriers that keep people out of opportunity and not having seats at the tables of power in state government. We have the most diverse cabinet the state of Michigan's ever seen. When my executive office gets together, over 60% is female from all walks of life. It's really kind of remarkable, yeah. And it wasn't because we said we're going to hit 60%. It was because we were mindful about leveling barriers on the front end that usually keep the same group of people sitting around a table making decisions. And that was something that was important. But I've also done some symbolic things that are really important. Hosting a Diwali celebration at the governor's residence for the first time. Ensuring that during Ramadan we had an iftar dinner at the governor's residence. Flying the pride flag at the house or in my office building. These feel like symbolic things, but they're important for anyone who has a platform to show that we are going to live our values. We're going to live up to the promise. We've announced a lot of job investment in Michigan in the mobility space. Those are great victories. We have found some common ground around bringing down the cost of auto insurance for the people of Michigan. That was a bipartisan effort with the legislature. Let's see, I got a list. All right. And I think that as we move forward, a lot of the work we've done around the environment has been really important. I reorganized our department that was DEQ, it was known as, and now it's called EAGLE. It's about environment, the Great Lakes, and energy. We joined the U.S. Climate Alliance. We created a environmental justice advocate within the new Department of EAGLE because we know the Flint water crisis, people didn't know how to interface with state government and get assistance. And so these are all important pieces that we've done in this first 11 months that we feel good about, but we're going to put our foot on the gas as we go into 2020. The Great Lakes, we've 21% of the world's fresh waters in and around Michigan. 21% of the world. It's like 90% of the country's fresh water is in and around my state. And there's an incredible amount of responsibility that comes with that, to protect it, to make sure that it's not threatened by corporate polluters or invasive species. And so convening all of the Great Lakes governors and putting together a Great Lakes platform was something that we did as well, because we think it's important that the whole country understand what this means for our economic security, what it means for our ability to live and have a good life. And so that's something else that we've worked on a lot too.
Fantastic. I also wanted to just call out the work you've been doing on climate change in particular. I think one of the things that it's an important reminder is that climate change can be a win for the economy as well. And the example of states like Michigan are really important as we try to build public support into 2020. So that's a really vital work that we're all grateful for. I wanted to ask you, broadly speaking, Michigan will be a bit of a focus of attention over the next year. You referenced this, but Donald Trump made a lot of promises to working families about the economy and other issues. I think there's been a note that on some of these agenda items he's fallen short. What's your assessment of where the president's economic policies are, how they're impacting your state? And as governor, how are you fighting for working families in a way that may be different?
Yeah, I think that, Donald Trump made a lot of promises to farmers. And we know that deciding international policy of trade by tweet is dumb, to put it lightly, but it's also incredibly destructive. We export soybeans to China, for instance, and we've got a lot of farmers because it's been a hard season.
Yeah.
The weather has been difficult. We can't control the weather, but we should be able to control Twitter, right?
Right.
What we put out via Twitter and what our trade policy is going to be. And so I would imagine that whether it's someone in the auto industry who has seen these tariffs be so destructive in that space, or it is a craft brewer. We've got a phenomenal craft brewing industry in Michigan. I toured one of the facilities not long ago, and they said, see all these vats? Steel. See these cans? Aluminum. These tariffs are hurting our business as well. And so I do think that the promises around what tax changes were going to be and how it hasn't really, gotten to the middle class, in combination with these other pieces, mean a lot of people in Michigan who maybe considered voting for him or didn't vote. That's
Right.
the big story about that last election. People who didn't vote have seen how dangerous these policies are and destructive. And so as the overtime changes that we're pursuing, these are the things that we're doing to meet the needs of hardworking people in Michigan. And I think it's how you raise people out of poverty, give them a hand out, and that's what we're going to do on the state level. And it'd be lovely to have someone who valued all of that work in the
presidency,
in
yes.
the U.S. Capitol.
Couldn't agree more. An area that you've focused on is infrastructure. And I think one of the things that we try to draw attention to here at CAP is how much the lack of federal infrastructure investment is hurting states. Basically, we're not keeping up as a country with the needed investment. As a result, much of our nation's aging infrastructure remains vulnerable to challenges posed by regional economic transitions, technology advancement, and particularly the climate crisis. In the absence of federal investment, I know this has been a priority for you, but how are you prioritizing changes to Michigan's infrastructure as you go forward?
So I ran for governor, and one of the phrases that I became known for was, we're going to fix the damn roads. And
It was great. That's great.
well, it's become the catchphrase, and everywhere I go, that's what people know me for in Michigan. But I think it was simply reflecting the sentiment that people feel. They see they see potholes and bills to fix rims or replace windshields as the starkest sign of government that's not working. And that's how people talk about our roads. And so I didn't poll test that phrase. It was how we talk about the roads, and that's why it's such a centerpiece of what we need to do in this country. Our grandparents made incredible contributions for the betterment of society. And our parents' generation and our generation has not even made the maintenance payment. And now, people are paying for it. And it's disproportionately felt by people at the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum. Rich folks can buy water if the water coming out of their tap isn't clean, or drive their second car when their main car is in the shop, or hire a tutor when their child is in a classroom that's got, 40 students. And so this is why it's disproportionately impacting people on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum. So it's the most progressive thing we can do is meet these fundamental needs. So I proposed a gas tax like almost, half the governors in our country did, because the national level's not keeping up where it needs to be. And I had a Republican legislature who just said no. And it's unfortunate because the average person in my state is spending about $500 a year to fix their car, where they would have spent, a couple $100s a year in a gas tax that would actually fix the problem. The legislature's response was, well, let's sell a few bridges. You've heard the old joke, I'll sell you a bridge. That was their one of the things they suggested. Or rating teacher pensions to pay for roads was another suggestion of the Republicans in my state. And I think that shows you if solutions are going to happen, it's going to be by electing more pragmatic people who really care about solving the problem and not just a political talking point.
One of the reasons why redistricting is so important in 2020. So we're thankful that you're there. Under the Trump administration's trade agenda, manufacturing production growth has reached its lowest level since the Great Recession. We've seen recent headlines about companies such as GM closing down factories in Michigan. And just as a reminder, Donald Trump promised that he would end all outsourcing. Since that isn't happening, what strategies are you pursuing to mitigate the harm caused by this administration and to boost job creation in your state?
Yeah, so one of the things that we know is that there's a skills gap, and many states are on the way to trying to ensure people have paths to skills. We've done ourselves a huge disservice by thinking that there's only one path to prosperity and integrity in work, and it was through a 4-year degree. I'm not saying 4-year degrees aren't valuable. They absolutely are. But at the same time, we took funding away from public colleges. And so we've priced out, for most people, the ability to get that 4-year degree, and undervalued certificates and pathways into the trades or into so many different 2-year degree programs. And so closing that skills gap is something that I put a huge priority on, and we're making some ground on that. I set a audacious goal of 60% of our adult population with a post-secondary certificate or degree by 2030, and we got a lot of work to get there, but I think that's really important. The most recession-proof thing you can have is a skill.
Yeah.
But we're seeing a lot of investment in Michigan right now. GM has just announced some electric vehicle production that they're going to do in our state. FCA has made a big new investment in Michigan, and so we're working to make sure that in the mobility space, we have to stop thinking about cars the way we used to. Think about advanced manufacturing and autonomous, connected, shared electric vehicles. That's where we're really pressing forward in Michigan and making sure we still have the pole position in that space.
That's exciting. I'm going to turn it to audience questions in a minute, but I wanted to finish on the issue of healthcare. Before the end of the year, the Fifth Circuit will rule on Texas versus Azar, a case that could dismantle the Affordable Care Act and take healthcare coverage from 20 million Americans, including taking away funding for the Medicaid expansion. Could you talk about the impact that losing the ACA would have on families in Michigan, and your broad views on healthcare writ large would be great.
So I think one of the most important issues in the election of that 2018 was healthcare. I was running against an attorney general in Michigan who had filed 7 lawsuits against the Affordable Care Act. He tried to tell people he wanted to protect pre-existing conditions, but he wanted to, everything he had done in his career, was absolutely the opposite. He was just telling people what he thought they wanted to hear. And people in this country want us to fight back on these attacks on our health care, and that's why our Attorney General, Dana Nessel, and I joined, lawsuits to protect the ACA on behalf of the state of Michigan, and withdrew all the other filings that the previous guy had done. And I think this is something that, as we can think about where we're headed in an election, it's so important that we're fighting back every attempt to repeal. My legislature passed work requirements to insist that people live up to a certain expectation in order to be eligible for Medicaid expansion. So rolling back the work that we did, that 680,000 people.
Yeah.
And then they sent me a budget that didn't fund enforcing the work requirements, which means you weren't able to actually help people meet the work requirements. So you're guaranteeing the loss of health care coverage. And let's be clear, work requirements sounds like policy to help people get to work. That's not what it's about. It's about taking health care away from people. If they truly wanted to help people get to work, they would have things like child care or transportation or different aspects of ensuring people have that ability to get to work, not just taking away their health care. And so we're fighting back on all of these. We're asking for some help actually from the administration. I'm not real optimistic about how that's going to go, but I do think that fighting this lawsuit is incredibly important, as is doing everything at the state level to protect what we've done and to expand on it.
Yeah, and as you see the debate going forward in Michigan, do you have hopes to help shore up the ACA or take other actions to expand coverage beyond what exists today?
So at this juncture, I've got a phenomenal leader in our DHHS, Robert Gordon, who is...
He used to work at CAP many years ago,
Yeah,
just to say.
He is unafraid and bold about how we're going to unilaterally expand on what we have done as an administration. The best way to do it would be to have a legislature that could enshrine some of these improvements into the law, so they lived well beyond my time as governor. And that's my goal. And that's why, getting past this gerrymandered legislature into redistricting where we have a commission that draws lines is one really important aspect to it, but also this presidential election is as well. So right now I'm trying to hold the line, expand where we can unilaterally, and keep the legislature from contracting that coverage.
Fantastic. Great. We have time for a few questions. If you just raise your hand and say who you're with, that would be great. Right here.
Thank you. My name's Kirk, and I'm a small business owner in the area, but I'm from Detroit.
Oh.
And my 95-year-old mother still lives in Detroit. So I would like to hear a little bit about what's going on in Detroit and what the state can do to keep that progress going, and also to keep my mother safe.
Yep.
And secondly, I wonder who you think's going to win the game this weekend.
So our big intrastate game of Michigan State is this weekend. And oh, look I see a Spartan right behind you. I am a Spartan, so I gotta say go green. All right, we got a number of Spartans in here. Do we have any Wolverines in here? Okay. I love the U of M. Every day but Saturday. But, Michigan's had a great season, so we won't talk too much more about football. There's a lot of good stuff going on in Detroit. Incredible strides have been made. I'm sure you've been back to see your mom and been able to see it. Detroit is a massive city. It's 143 square miles. It's bigger than, the next 5 cities combined when you look at the footprint. And it's because when the auto industry was growing, we built out as opposed to up like a lot of cities did. These enormous manufacturing facilities take up a lot of land space. So we've got this huge footprint. And so there's some wonderful activity going on in a subsection of the city. I think they're really trying to grow that and ensure that, number one, public safety is a priority, but also the biggest challenge I see going forward is making sure that the public education system improves. All the millennials in the world coming in to work for Dan Gilbert in the city of Detroit, it's wonderful. But we want them to stay and raise their families in the city of Detroit. And until we have an education system that people will be happy to send their kids to, I think that's going to be the challenge. And that's why the work that I'm doing around the budget and reprioritizing how we spend our dollars so that there's equity in school funding is really critical. And if the budget I had introduced become a reality, DPS would have been the biggest beneficiary because of the way that we prioritize districts with high poverty, at-risk students, or students that require special education needs. But I think, in the large sense, there's so much good activity happening in Detroit. Are things perfect? No. Is there a lot of work yet to do? Yes. But from the time I lived there when I was in law school till now, it is a dramatically different place. And I'm a good partner to the mayor of Detroit, because I know you can't have a successful Michigan if you don't have the biggest city of our state isn't successful as well. Yeah.
Over right here, and then we'll go to the back. And just identify yourself with a full
Good morning.
name.
My name is Francisco de la Lama, and I'm with the Mexican Embassy. As you know, Michigan exports to Mexico and Canada around $36 billion each year. What do you think might happen to your state if USMCA doesn't get ratified?
Well, we recognize how important that relationship is, and that's why when the president was contemplating tariffs on Mexico, I got on the phone with Secretary Lighthizer to make sure they understood that even though we're far from the border, we have a very strong interest in what the policy is around what's happening. A few hours later, they decided not to move forward. I don't think it's because of my phone call, but maybe. Couldn't hurt. So, we're watching USMCA very closely. I understand that there's been some progress, and that I am meeting with the speaker later today, and that's, perhaps one of the things we might talk about. I've talked a lot with my delegation about where things are, and I'm hopeful that some forward movement happens very quickly here.
Over there? Oh, I'm sorry. Right here. I don't want to pass over Morgan. A Michigander.
Yeah, hi. Diab Paris, Americans for Financial Reform, go green.
Go white.
Recently signed an order that would strengthen ties with the state and the Native American tribes. In my recent memory, I don't think any other governor has formally acknowledged our existence, let alone prioritizing building a relationship and strengthening those. So I'd just like to know a little bit more about how some of those initiatives will fall into your agenda for progressive change.
All right. Well, thank
Great.
you. And you're really paying attention. Do you live in Michigan?
My mother is a tribal council member for the Nottawa-Sippy Huron Band of Colorado.
All right. Excellent. So, one of the things that I talked about leveling barriers on the front end so we have real opportunity. In my legal department, for the first time ever of any administration, as far as we can find, there's a Native American person at the table. Her name is Winona Single. She is one of my lawyers. And we've, I think, had a lot of work to do to mend some of the relationships between state government and our tribal communities. And so this was something that came from a conversation with a number of the leaders who said this is something we would recognize as valuable, that we would appreciate, and that this could be a critical function to really more formalizing our relationship and acknowledging that they are, sovereign nations within our border and how important that is. And so, one of the things I think that I've come to appreciate is how the platform that I have has reverberations that even I don't appreciate sometimes, and how these acts carry such great meaning and will set the tone for how we move forward. We are going to be, I think, working well with our tribes, and we're certainly not always going to agree on every issue, but we're going to improve it a great deal. And I think conversation around making sure that we've got policies and that recognize and value the Native American community is something that's really important to me personally, and I think good for our state. Yeah.
And then I'll head over there.
My name's Deborah Schumann. I'm with Physicians for a National Health Program. Michigan went for President Trump in the 2016 election. I wonder if you could speak a little bit to what issues drove that, and what issues do you think are going to drive the 2020 race, and just how the people of Michigan have either benefited or been hurt by the current administration.
Yeah, and I'll just note that in your election, not only did you have counties that went for Donald Trump, you had a lot of voters who voted for Donald Trump in 2016 and then voted for you. So you have a unique expertise on the 2020 race.
It's one of the things that I was never quite sure what to make of when people would say, I voted for Donald Trump and I'm voting for you. So I said, thank you, but I don't get it. But fine, that's good. I appreciate it. Now, I think that part of the story of 2018, part of the story of 2016 is that we had incredibly low voter turnout. It wasn't that Michigan went from supporting Barack Obama in 2 successive elections to embracing Donald Trump. It was that people didn't turn out and vote. They didn't turn out and vote in communities across the state. It wasn't, people like to blame things on Detroit, for instance. Well, yeah, voter turnout was depressed in Detroit, but it was depressed in Flint, it was depressed in Grand Rapids, it was depressed in every part of my state, rural and urban. That was the big story from 2016. Too few people voted. He won by 11,000 votes. It was not an overwhelming victory, but I do think that it was, he had more enthusiasm on his side of the ledger. People, I think, found him to be genuine, and for I think the way that he communicated gave people a sense of comfort that he was going to be fighting for them. And for whatever reason, that did not translate from Hillary Clinton to our voters. I can't speak to it beyond that. I can tell you this. Voters turned out in the droves in 2018. We won every statewide election. All women, too, by the way. Not by design. We all worked hard to get to where we were, but that's how it turned out. My Attorney General is an unabashed, progressive, first gay Attorney General ever. She's fantastic. Our Secretary of State, also a leader in her field. People voted overwhelmingly Democratic, and all the statewide races we carried. We don't control either branch of the legislature because of gerrymandering, and that's what a big deal gerrymandering is. They've drawn it for themselves, and the only thing that matters is a Republican primary to them, and that's why they're even more ideological than the average Republican. So as I think about, the lessons or where we're going, I really think it's important not to take anyone for granted. Neera mentioned, I went to all 83 counties. Michigan's a huge state. When you're in the Upper Peninsula on the western end, you're closer, let's see, when you're in Lansing, that's the state capital, all right? I'm going to get out my Michigan map, right? Lansing. I'm closer to Washington, D.C. in Lansing, Michigan than I am to the western end of the Upper Peninsula. It's a massive state. It took a long time to get to all 83 counties. But I did it because everyone's important. And I think it's critical that candidates and parties understand that. You have to show up. And when you show up, you don't get distracted by the issue of the day. You know what people care about, and it keeps you tethered to those dinner table issues. And I think that's the big difference. I don't believe that there will be depressed voter turnout in this next election, because people understand the consequences of not voting or of voting for someone that they didn't really know. And so no matter who the Democratic nominee turns out to be, I do believe we'll have a much higher engagement, but we can't make any assumptions.
Great question. Over here?
Hi, Stanley Hedgerita from Michigan State, working at the Partnership for Public Service. I really wanted to know, what successes have you had building coalitions across party lines to help move the needle forward on your key issues?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. I think the greatest one was Medicaid expansion, and that was when I was still in the legislature working with a Republican governor and Republican-led Senate and House. I mean, the biggest one in terms of what it means to people's lives. We've done a lot of good work just in this first 11 months. We've changed our no-fault system so that consumers are going to get some relief in their car insurance, the highest car insurance in the nation. It felt the worst in our urban centers, and we're going to see prices coming down. Already we're seeing that happen, and so that's something that I think is really a good thing that we've done, and that was a bipartisan effort. We've got a lot of criminal justice reform pieces coming to my desk. There's a series of expungement bills that are coming probably when they get back, wait for it, from hunting break. Only in Michigan does the legislature, maybe Montana, take off hunting break. But they're coming back in December, and I anticipate those happening as well. And I think that, let's see, there were a couple of other things that we've done, but I think those are the biggest, best ones that we have done. I'm sad to say roads became a partisan issue. Roads are not partisan. When you fix them, everyone benefits, and it's absolutely essential to public safety. But that somehow became a partisan issue, and so I'm going to keep pressing ahead. I'm going to fix those damn roads one way or another. But that I wish I could say was one of the things that it's not yet.
Fantastic. I will go in the back over there and then come through here.
Hi, I'm Marissa Navarro. I work at CAP, but I'm from Grand Rapids, Michigan.
All right.
You touched a little bit about this, but can you talk more in depth about our K through 12 system and how you plan to solve or close gaps within that?
Yeah, so you're from Grand Rapids and you're talking education, so naturally we're going to talk about Betsy DeVos, right? So the world unfortunately has gotten to know Betsy DeVos. When she was being nominated for Department of Education, everyone in Michigan was like, are you kidding me right now? Because it's the DeVos policies that have created such a discrepancy in funding in public schools and has undermined our ability to ensure that we're giving every child a great public school education. We have more charter schools in Michigan per capita than any other state in the nation, and most of them are for-profit. I mean, like 80% of them are for-profit charter schools that are draining kids from our public schools and providing a substandard education. And so we got people making money off of not educating kids, and it's undermining our public school system. So one of the additional aspects that I think has contributed to our poor outcomes for kids is that we've traditionally funded schools through property taxes. And so wealthier areas had more money for their education of their students. And it flies in the face of all the science that says kids in higher poverty areas need more investment and wraparound services to be successful. And so these two things I think have contributed to our outcomes for our kids. So in the budget that I introduced, I've got, it was really based on equitable funding. And that's why we prioritized dollars for at-risk students as well as schools that have CTE programs and schools that have special education programs. This is how we start to mend that discrepancy in funding and create more opportunity for better outcomes equitably. I also, as I had to balance the budget, made some changes in the charter school line, and it's come with a lot of people angry with me, but I've explained to them, you want to roll back the DeVos agenda, this is what it looks like, and it's, thank you. Well, a lot of my allies are happy, but they've got a pretty powerful lobby, and the DeVos's right now have got billboards beating me up across Michigan about not being able to get roads done, which the irony is the people they put in the legislature are what's standing in the way of me getting roads done. So this is an ongoing battle. But if we're going to meet the needs of our children in our K-12 public education system, we have to be addressing this on both fronts. And that's part of the work that I've been doing. But it's also why this next election matters. Who's in the White House matters. Who's in the State House matters. And they're all on the ballot in 2020. If I've got a chamber, one chamber of the legislature that'll work with me because the Senate's not up, we're going to be able to take much greater strides. We're going to keep moving forward no matter who's there. But we'll be able to take bigger strides if we get at least one chamber, and that's what's at stake in this next election.
Just one fun fact about Betsy DeVos. We worked on all the nominations, or all the cabinet of opposing a lot of the cabinet that Trump put forward. Betsy DeVos had the most opposition to her of any of the cabinet members, and it was actually a very diverse coalition. It was mothers across the board calling in from all over the country, and it was both moms of urban kids in urban schools, but really lots of rural schools as well, because they understood that actually a lot of her initiatives drained funding from rural schools and suburban schools as well as urban schools. So it's not, I think they like to paint it as one group or another, but basically they're trying to take public funds away from all public schools.
Yep. Well, I think, kind of to your point in the back there and this question, in 2018, I did not run against Donald Trump. I didn't run against him. He wasn't on the ballot. My opponent was embracing him. But I did run against Betsy DeVos. And she's the least popular political person in the state. Has been for a couple of years now and continues to be. And so that was kind of I think a lesson that, we've got to run on things that inspire people to come out to vote. And if you're going to have a debate, if you're going to debate policy with identifying a person, make sure it's the right one.
We have time for one last question right here. Sorry. Yeah, we'll do two. I'll let you go ahead.
My name's Amanda Linton. I actually live in Virginia, but my parents are both Michiganders.
All right.
So from a national perspective, you inherited a mess with the Flint water crisis. I wanted to know, because I haven't really heard much about it, has that improved? And if not, is there something that we can do from the outside to help in that situation?
Great question.
Thank you. And thank
And then
you.
we'll take this question so you can just answer
Okay.
both, and as we have to.
Hi, my name is Jemiah Grace. I'm interning out here, but I'm from Saginaw, and I'm also a Michigan State student.
All right.
Great.
But speaking to you talked about like the gas tax and how that's going to help our infrastructure and everything. But like many other places in Michigan, Saginaw is struggling. So a gas tax wouldn't really be beneficial for people that are like really depending upon their cars and being able to like just get to work and things. So like, how would you justify something like that to people like in my community that are struggling?
So I'll answer the questions in reverse order as they were asked. So I appreciate that concern, and that's a concern of mine as well when I introduced the gas tax. I didn't do it because I'm excited about a gas tax. No one wants to pay a gas tax. But the fact of the matter is I was worried about people at the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum who are going to struggle to pay it. It's about $300 a year for the average driver, depending on how many miles you put on your car and how old your car is and efficient. And that's not something that would be easy for some people to absorb, there's no question. So I also built in the earned income tax credit, which would actually dwarf the gas tax. So I could fund it by ensuring more people pay into infrastructure, but it gives me the chance to give relief to the people that really need it the most. More relief than even the size of the gas tax. Another piece was repealing the pension tax so that seniors who are on fixed incomes wouldn't have to bear this disproportionate burden as well. And those were two pieces that were a part of that plan. But I'll also say this, the most regressive thing is a failing infrastructure. Because if you don't have resources, you don't have options. If your water is not clean coming out of your tap, you can't just go out and buy water. Or if your child, you can't just move your child to a different school or hire a tutor. Or have multiple vehicles to choose from driving to work. A blown tire can be a week's pay for people in Michigan and sideline you for a whole week. And I think one of the most compelling conversations I had on that whole crazy 2-year campaign was a mom from Flint who her son was in the Detroit Children's Hospital, and she drove up and down I-75 every day. 3 other kids at home in Flint. She hit a pothole, and it busted the rim on her car. She was sidelined for a whole day. She didn't go see her son in the hospital. She had to come up with $800 to fix her car. It did so much damage. And so I had to borrow the money from someone and try to hustle home to get back to her child. And she said, I just need you to fix the damn roads. And so I just tell this story because that's really what centered me on wanting to fix this problem. The longer we wait to fix it, the more costly those repair bills are going to be.
Yeah.
And paying to fix cars instead of paying to fix the infrastructure is the most expensive, dangerous way to go about it, and that's what I'm concerned about. So those two pieces were, one was relief, and the other was kind of the rationale why this is so important to do. On Flint, in particular, with regard to the water crisis, I did inherit a mess. And our budget in Michigan is, it's big, but the general fund part of our budget is about $10 billion. The legislature spent $1.3 billion on their way out the door. And then I've got lawsuits that are over $2 billion against the state around Flint. So I'm in the process of trying to settle those lawsuits, which is difficult. And being someone who knows that the people of Flint deserve justice, I absolutely want them to have justice. I've also got to figure out how to balance the rest of this budget. And so this is some of the hard work that we're doing. The pipes have been replaced largely. I think it's maybe 10% still have yet to be replaced. The mayor that was overseeing them just lost her reelection. And so we have a new mayor coming in. And so with that, there are going to be some, you know, I think probably learn some things about what's happening in Flint, but also as a state, I've got all the departments converging to ensure that this new mayor has every resource that is available to us to make sure that the people of Flint are made whole. That means wraparound services for kids in the education you know, sphere, and in addition to water that is still being provided to Flint.
Thank you so much. Thank
Right.
you for the wide range of questions and for the wide-ranging agenda you have to solve so many challenges. It's an honor to have you at CAP, and we hope you'll come back.
Thanks, Neera.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.